My name is Henry Lawson. I am 58 years old, and 3 weeks ago my world shifted with six blinking numbers on a lottery ticket worth $62 million. I sat at this very kitchen table, the ticket trembling in my hands, my breath caught in my throat. But even as the shock surged through me, one decision came as cold and steady as stone. No one in my family would ever know. Not my son, not my daughter, not my brother who's bled me dry for years. You see, in my family, money isn't love, it's leverage, and I was about to find out just how little I truly meant to them. And here's the part you won't believe. Before I ever spent a single dollar of that fortune, I decided to test them. I wanted to know if they thought I was broke. Who would step forward? Who would vanish? Who would show their true face? The answer nearly broke me, and it changed everything. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The first night after those numbers lit up the screen, I didn't sleep. I stared at that ticket under the dull light above this table, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the old clock on the wall. 62 million. After taxes, maybe 40. Still more money than I'd ever imagined holding. For a moment the boy in me, the boy who grew up in a drafty Ohio farmhouse, wanted to shout, to run outside, to tell the world I was finally free. But the man I am, the man who's been weathered by years of family disappointments, knew better. I poured myself a glass of bourbon, though my doctor had warned me about my blood pressure. The amber liquid caught the light as I swirled it, and I thought about every time I'd already played the fool. Mark, my son, had called 2 years ago in the dead of night. Dad, it's just 5,000, just until the business takes off. I wired the money before sunrise. He never mentioned it again. Emily, my daughter, was subtler. She wanted me at her side when she bought her first condo until she needed help covering the closing costs. She promised it was temporary. 5 years later, she barely answers my calls. And Robert, my younger brother, if there were a world record for borrowed cash and broken promises, he'd be a champion. He always had that wheedling tone, that way of making me feel guilty for having just a little more than him, even when all I had was a steady job and a modest pension. I let the bourbon burn down my throat. If I told them about the win, I knew what would happen. They'd circle like vultures, each with their stories, their needs, their urgent crises, and in the end it wouldn't be a gift. It would be an obligation, a leash around my neck. The bourbon glass landed on the table with a dull thud. I made my decision right there. Silence was my protection. The next morning the sun crept through the blinds, casting lines across the worn wood floor. I brewed my coffee black and strong, the way I've always liked it. As the aroma filled the kitchen, I opened my laptop and searched how to claim lottery anonymously. My fingers hesitated on the keys, but I pressed on. That's when I stumbled upon articles about blind trusts. An attorney could set one up, shield my identity. I could walk away with my winnings, and the world would never know Henry Lawson had become a multi-millionaire overnight. My lips curled into a half-smile. That anonymity was worth more than the ticket itself. But even with the safety net forming in my mind, another thought pushed its way through. Over the years I had carried my family through their storms quietly, without fanfare. And yet, when I'd needed even a fraction of that support in return, when my wife Ellen was sick, and I was drowning in hospital bills, who was there? Not Mark, not Emily, not Robert. They each had excuses, busy lives, pressing needs. It was Aunt Martha, my father's sister, long retired and living off a meager pension, who slipped me a check for $200 and whispered, "I wish it were more, Henry." That memory stung. It stayed with me as I sat at the computer, scrolling through names of attorneys downtown. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I found on a firm's website. A woman's voice answered crisply. "Myers and Associates. How may I direct your call?" "Yes," I said, my voice lower than usual. "I need to schedule an appointment with Miss Linda Myers. It's regarding estate and financial planning." There was a pause on the other end. "Then we have an opening tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Will that work?" "That'll do," I said, scribbling the address on a notepad. As I hung up, the silence of the house pressed in again. My home was modest. A one-story place with creaking floors, the paint outside peeling a bit more each year. It suited me, though. After Ellen passed, I hadn't had the heart to move. This was where we'd lived our last days together, where her laughter had once echoed in the kitchen. The thought of filling these rooms with the sound of relatives begging for handouts made me feel sick. That night, I sat on the porch as the streetlights flickered on. My neighbor, Mr. Harris, waved as he took his dog for a walk. I raised a hand in return, thinking how blissfully unaware he was of the slip of paper in my pocket that could buy every house on this block. I envied his ignorance. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. A text from Robert Henry. Buddy, can we talk? I'm in a bit of a jam. I didn't reply. Not yet. I stared at those words, my jaw tightening. This was exactly why I couldn't tell them. The ink wasn't even dry on my miracle, and already the familiar claws were reaching. I pocketed the phone, stood, and went inside. The next morning, I dressed in my best jacket, navy blue, with buttons that had grown a little loose, and took the elevator up to the 10th floor of a glass high-rise downtown. The lobby smelled of polished marble and money. Linda Myers greeted me with a firm handshake. She was around my age, with silver hair pulled neatly back, eyes sharp behind her glasses. "Mr. Lawson," she said warmly. "Let's step into my office." I followed her in, clutching the envelope in my pocket like it was a lifeline. Once the door shut, I laid the ticket on her desk. For a moment her eyebrows shot up, but she recovered quickly, professionalism wrapping around her like a cloak. "I see," she said softly. "Well, you've come to the right place. We can protect your identity, Mr. Lawson. But first we need to discuss your intentions. What do you want this money to do for you?" Her question lingered in the air. I opened my mouth, then closed it. What did I want? Security, yes. Freedom, certainly. But more than that, I wanted truth. I wanted to know once and for all if my family cared for me, or for what I could provide. "I want to keep this quiet," I said finally, "and I want to make sure if I decide to help anyone, it's on my terms." Linda nodded. "Then we'll begin with a blind trust. It will take a few weeks, but once established, the funds will be untouchable by anyone but you." I breathed out relief mixing with dread. On the bus ride home, I stared out the window as the city blurred past. I thought about the years behind me, about every holiday where I'd been a wallet instead of a guest, every phone call that started with pleasantries but ended with requests, and I thought about what Linda had asked me. "What do you want this money to do?" That night, the idea came to me slow at first, then with undeniable clarity. I wouldn't tell them about the winnings. Instead, I would test them. I would tell each one the same story, that I had lost money, that I was on the verge of losing my home, that I needed help, just a small amount, compared to what I'd given them over the years. I wanted to see when the tables turned, who would show up and who would walk away. I sat at this table, pen scratching against paper, writing down names: Mark, Emily, Robert, my sister-in-law Sharon, each one who had ever taken, borrowed, or demanded. I even wrote Martha's name, though my gut told me she would help if she could. As I wrote, my chest tightened. Was this cruel? Perhaps. But after a lifetime of being the one who carried everyone else, I needed to know. I needed the truth, no matter how bitter. The house was quiet when I finished. I folded the paper, slipped it into my pocket, and blew out the candle on the table. The flame flickered once before vanishing into smoke. Tomorrow I will make the first call. And so began the test that would unravel everything I thought I knew about family, about loyalty, about love. I lay awake long after midnight, the notebook with my family's names folded neatly inside my pocket. The house was still the way it had been since Ellen passed. I used to think silence was the cruelest companion a man could have. Now, after years of being drained by the very people who called themselves family, I had learned to treat silence like an ally. It didn't take from me. It didn't lie. It didn't disguise need as love. My mind kept circling back to the past, replaying moments I once tried to bury. The first time I realized that money would always come before me in this family was when I was 17. I had just gotten accepted into Ohio State. I remember walking into the kitchen, letter in hand, heart pounding with pride. My mother smiled faintly, but my father shook his head. "We can't afford it, Henry. Not unless you take out loans." Robert was sitting at the table, younger than me by 5 years, slurping cereal. He didn't look up. That night, while my parents argued about the cost, my mother whispered, "Maybe Robert will make it easier on us one day. He's got the charm." Charm, she called it. I had to work hard. Somehow charm always seemed more valuable in their eyes. I carried 2 part-time jobs to pay my way through school. I never asked for their help again. But whenever Robert wanted something, summer camp books, his first car, they always found a way. Sometimes it was my savings they borrowed. Sometimes it was a check with my name on it. I told myself it was fine. He was younger. He'd grow out of it. But Robert never grew out of anything. He grew into a man who believed the world owed him. And somehow that debt always seemed to be mine. Life with Ellen was different. She grounded me. She was steady, soft-spoken, a school teacher who believed small acts of kindness were worth more than any dollar. We lived modestly, a small house, wallpaper peeling at the edges, but filled with laughter. We raised our children, Mark and Emily, in that house. Those years before the cracks began to show were the only time I ever felt secure in my family. We didn't have much, but what we had felt enough. Then illness came, and it was like someone had tilted the ground beneath our feet. Ellen's diagnosis, lung cancer, shattered everything. She had never smoked a day in her life. I worked myself raw trying to keep her comfortable. I sold my boat, drained our retirement, and took shifts I was too old for. When the bills became mountains I couldn't climb, I did the one thing I swore I'd never do. I called my children, and I called Robert. Mark answered first. His voice was clipped, hurried. "Dad, I can't keep bleeding money. The startup's just taking off. 5 grand here, 10 grand there. It all adds up." The words cut deeper than he realized. Emily's tone was gentler, but no less final. "Dad, Paul and I are paying off the condo. Maybe in a few months we could—" The sentence drifted like smoke, meaningless. "And Robert?" "Well," Robert sighed into the phone, as if I had ruined his evening. "I've got my debts, Henry. Maybe you should refinance the house. That's what people do." I remember sitting at the kitchen table that night, Ellen asleep in the other room, my head in my hands. Not one of them could be bothered to stand beside me when I was drowning. Only Martha, my father's sister, who retired and lives on a pension that barely covers groceries, showed up. She pressed $200 into my palm with trembling fingers. "I wish it were more," she whispered. I told her it was enough, but the shame of needing her, and the gratitude I felt in equal measure, stayed with me. When Ellen passed 6 months later, Mark and Emily came to the funeral in stiff black clothes, checking their phones between condolences. Robert stood at the pulpit, giving a grand speech about how family was everything, then left early to catch a flight to Las Vegas. The hollowness of it all stayed with me more than the words. "Dad, you'll be okay," Mark said, patting my shoulder with one hand, his car keys already in the other. "Call me if you need anything." Emily offered, her voice floating, as if she knew I never would. Robert hugged me, reeking of cologne and whiskey, and muttered, "Stay strong, brother, stay strong," as if strength alone was supposed to replace love.